Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Career Development Series webinar, Leverage and Pivot, Taking Your Legal Identity to the Next Level. The ABA Career Development Series is brought to you by the ABA Career Center. It is a monthly webinar series that contains practical tips on job search and professional development issues for seasoned and newer lawyers alike. The ABA Career Center offers both career development resources and a job board, where you can upload your resume for employers to search and create job alerts based on your search preferences. All this and more is accessible at ambar.org/careers. Joining us today is ABA Career Center board members Avery Blank and Cheryl Heisler. They are both career coaches and consultants. They will introduce our speakers for the program. Avery and Cheryl, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everybody. This is Cheryl Heisler. Avery and I are very excited to talk about career transition with you. Right, Avery?
Indeed, yes. Good afternoon to all, though maybe some in the morning out in the West Coast. Really looking forward to today's discussion.
We have we'll talk more about ourselves in a second, but we have two terrific presenters with us today. Our panelists are generously sharing their time, their stories, and their advice. And what's great, besides their stories, the fact that they have gone off in very different directions. We're going to get some nice variety, and you'll hear stories from people who have, like Howard, who are currently juggling a legal practice with a passion, and in his case, it's for the restaurant industry. So he is a lawyer, works as a lawyer, he has a role as an investor, he is an entrepreneur, and he has helped open several very cool Chicago hotspots. So I'm encouraged to hear Howard's story, how he put these different pieces together, and of course what he's working on now. On a very different vein, we have Elaine Weiss, who has never been in a traditional practice, but instead has leveraged her JD for positions in healthcare policy, advocacy, and association management. And she currently serves as the executive director of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. So even if we didn't go past these two panelists, you get a sense of how diverse a law degree is as a background. And Avery and I will tell you a little bit about our stories, so you'll hear two more personal stories of how we've leveraged and pivoted with our JDs. Avery,
Indeed.
Would you like to lead off?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, I mean, Howard and Elaine's stories and their backgrounds sound fascinating, so I'm really looking forward to learning more and being able to ask questions as well. But as Cheryl said, first let's give a little bit of sense of what we do and how we've gotten to where we are currently. So my background is in public policy. I worked at all three levels of government, federal, state, and local levels, and have testified before legislative committees. So I was really focused on public policy, and I loved it because I really enjoy impacting communities. But at the same time, I felt, like I wanted to use more of my strategy skills. And I always had an entrepreneurial spirit, kind of this itch. And also, I wanted to work more on women's leadership on a daily basis, or at least more regularly than what I had done. And so I left my job, despite recently having been promoted, despite loving public policy work, and I just left and started my own business. And really, it just started organically. And, people always ask, I remember a colleague at work, she said, I could never do that. And I said, why? And she said, I just don't have the discipline like you do. And I never really thought about it that way. But it is true. I do have discipline. And I know that many people who do other things, with their JD, but also more of an entrepreneurial way, do have that discipline. And I remember thinking, as I was leaving, with that thought, there's a motto that I live my life by, and I remember reading in a book, and that is, the risk is losing out on the opportunity, not failing in the attempt. So despite leaving my job without necessarily having anything formal lined up, I knew I had to do it at that stage in my life because I wanted to try, even if I failed, to try and see something. So now I have my own consulting practice where I leverage my legal skills to help my clients to be better advocates and strategically position themselves for opportunities. My first client was a brief, warm introduction by email and then a 30-minute phone call. And then it just kind of developed over time. So what I do is I consult with clients. I write. One of the things I do as a senior contributor with Forbes, and I speak. So that's my story in a nutshell. Happy to explain more. But what about you, Cheryl?
Well, I love, Avery, that you talked about how you're disciplined. One of the hallmarks of my way of looking at the world is kind of open and undisciplined. I always want to get a little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out. So I want to try as many different things as I can. And ever since I left the practice of law for what was originally a stint in marketing, I joke around that I just have a mishmash career, or I think you'll see in the bios, I call myself a serial career changer. The dots do connect. I had an undergraduate background in communication. I decided to go into law in large part because my father, who meant well, said I don't have the stomach for medicine and blood, and what else are you going to do if you're a smart female? But I never really loved it. What I did like was ice cream, which sounds kind of funny, but the love of ice cream took me in a strange direction where I got to meet Ben and Jerry of the famous Ben and Jerry's company and realized that they were marketing ice cream, and that sounded cool. That took me into a position with Kraft Foods in brand management. Everybody asked, did you go in-house at Kraft? I said, no, I didn't do law. I didn't want to do law anymore. I thought the marketing part was cool. But what I learned in making that transition, and what I now help my clients understand, is you have a lot of skills that are very transferable. If you're a lawyer, you're smart. You're able to communicate. You're able to write. You're able to analyze and strategize and create. And all of those transferable skills work in different arenas, not just in the legal marketplace. So after working in Kraft Foods for a while in marketing, I got calls from other lawyers who said, help me get out, which was an aha moment for me. I thought I was the only one not happy in the practice of law. And that led to the foundation of Lawternatives. It's going on 32 years. And I've enjoyed my work tremendously, helping other lawyers find what they might rather be doing with those technical and transferable skills. Avery, like you, I find that one career change is a platform for others. So I have dabbled in recruiting and outplacement and articles and lecturing and radio shows, anything that falls under the career space, particularly the legal career space, I like to get my hands around. And I have to also say I'm always telling my clients to find the stuff that they love. And now I've got a little side hustle where I do signature cocktails. So we joke around it's a second bar exam. But the fun is once you start career changing and you open yourself up to the possibility of trying new things, there is so much you can do. And again, it makes a panel like this so much fun because I want to share those ideas with the rest of the gang who are listening today. So that's
Great.
my personal story. Again, happy to answer questions as we go on.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. So let's dive into what we're going to talk about today. So we're really going to focus on 4 primary things. One is lawyers and identity issues. What does it mean to be a lawyer? 2, what do I do next? So here's where we're really going to get involved, our panelists, Elaine and Howard, and talk about and so that they can share their words of wisdom. 3, how do I make the pivot? So what should you assess? What information do you actually need to make that change? And then finally, when do I make the move? So we'll talk about timing and those elements of timing. So let's move on. So did you know that these people are lawyers? So to the left, there's Savannah Guthrie. She's an NBC Today Show anchor. She has a law degree. In the middle, we have Christine Lagarde. She's the former chair of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and will be the next president of the European National Bank. She not only was a lawyer and a successful legal career, but she also was the chair of Baker McKenzie, a big international law firm, the first female to be chair. And then to the right, who would have thought? Andrea Bocelli, an Italian opera singer. Yes, he indeed went to law school. There are people like this all the time. You see them on TV and in magazines, and you have no idea that they went to law school, but have done something else or in a different role at this stage in their life. But there's not just famous people that we want to talk about. Cheryl, let's talk about real people, us.
Lots of real people. I love this chart. It's from the Law Crossing. I found it at www.lawcrossing.com, and I love it, even though it's kind of hard to read. But it's really good to know about. It's an attractive way to present the fact that there are almost unlimited varieties for things lawyers go on to do. In this case, it says 16 alternative careers for law school graduates. That number is not magic, and it's certainly not limited. If you look at these titles and you happen to see something that attracts you, law librarian, or in the blue, lobbyist, or in the green, preacher, that's great. It gives you some cold comfort that something that you want to do is something another lawyer may have done before you. But if you don't see yourself, or you don't know even what you're looking for, that's okay too. I see chef on here if you look around the 4 o'clock, if your hands were at 4 o'clock, but I sure don't see bartender or signature cocktail creator up there. And I know that for a fact that's something else you can do with a law degree. So why I love this chart is it gives you some ideas to get started, but think about those circles expanding out into infinity. There are more concentric circles around that center. And I also want you guys to reframe the major question that's sort of hanging out there, which is not what can I do with my law degree, but rather what do I want to do and how can I use my JD to help me get there. It's a smarter way to ask the question because then you're looking inside first. And when we get to the steps to take, holding up that mirror to yourself and saying, what am I interested in? What do I care about? What do I really want to do with my time and my energies? Then back it up with, well, I've got these other pieces of these other skills and I can transfer into the areas that I really like, not a list, a static list that somebody else made that said these are the things lawyers can do. So just use this as a starting point. I want to add one other thing before I toss it back to you, Avery. I always tell my clients, if you're going to spend the time networking or learning or reading or attending a webinar or a seminar, learn one thing. And I urge everybody who's tuned in right now to make sure you walk away with at least one new idea, next step, question that you didn't have before. That way we'll know that the time you spent with us has been useful. Avery, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. So let's go to this identity issue or question. So when people ask you, what do you do for a living? What do you say? Think about that. So if you're practicing law, you probably would say lawyer or attorney. But what if you were no longer practicing? How would you answer that question? Would you still, instinctively say or want to say lawyer or attorney? So think about that. Why is that important to you? What makes you feel like you have to say that you're an attorney or a lawyer? It can be that you believe in the mission, and the purpose of being a lawyer. But also, is it about continuing a family tradition, or is it a status symbol to you? Do you feel like you need to prove or demonstrate that you worked hard to get to where you are? Because we all know that, yes, as lawyers and going to law school, yes, we worked hard. Do we want people to know that? So think about, what does it mean to you? Why did you go to law school? I know, and I don't know about you, Cheryl, but I know I went to law school, to be a better advocate. So to me, law means, regardless of the traditional practicing or non-practicing, law means advocacy and being able to, people able to better speak up for themselves and defend themselves. And to me, my work still involves advocacy. And then, think about what defines you. What do you want to be? What interests you? Do you want a degree to define you, or do you want a job to define you? Do you want a profession to define you, or do you want to define your career? And I know this statistic, Cheryl, you probably have heard this before, that the average person changes careers 5 to 7 times during their working life. Do you want to slow your career advancement because you might feel tied to a particular identity? What are your thoughts, Cheryl?
These are great questions, and I'm trying to go back in my own head. I don't think, and maybe this explains why I didn't particularly love law school, I didn't really see myself as a lawyer. I don't think I really knew what lawyers did. It was a substitute for, as I said earlier, I didn't have the number skills to be an accountant, and I didn't have the I couldn't handle the sight of blood, so I couldn't be a doctor. I value my legal degree and the learning, and we're going to get into that a little bit later about what you always carry with you. But I don't think I did a good enough job myself of figuring out that identity. And these are really good questions. And it does require you to look inside and not just give the rote answers. Well, my father was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, or yes, I think I can help people. Those may be true, but do they apply to you, right? It's that personal spin on it. And why is it really important to you to spend the time and the money and the effort and the time it takes to then develop a career before you find out that you shouldn't have perhaps done that? That is really useful. They're very good questions. I guess the next thing you have to ask then is when you're looking at career change, and we can advance the slide here, if I do change careers, will I lose my legal identity? I don't think that's a problem, although I've worked with a number of people who had to get to that point. The first thought is, once you're a lawyer, you're always a lawyer. You have learned, I think we can hit the slide again, and that should give us the next piece. Yes, so once a lawyer, you're always a lawyer. You worked hard for that title. It's part of who you are. Whether or not you always need to tell people that you're an attorney, that's something else. You may want to trot this out every once in a while and let people know, and other times you may want to hide it. There's a funny story my husband tells. When he first found out he passed the bar exam, he couldn't reach anybody. We weren't married yet. He couldn't get his folks. He couldn't get me, so he took himself out to a neighborhood tavern and ordered a beer and had a big smile on his face, and the guy next to him was like the opposite mood. He was kind of crying in his beer, and David's smiling, and this guy says, "I just had the worst day. Some son of a gun lawyer took me for all I had," and he went on and on and on. And then he looked over at David. He said, "What are you so happy about?" And David's comment was, "I just got a new car." So there are times you want to trot out the fact that you're a lawyer, and other times you don't. You will always rely on your legal thinking skills. That's something you can't turn off. You're going to look at all sides of an issue. You're going to ask yourself, well, what might go wrong with this? You're going to find that even when you're looking at a HIPAA form in the doctor's office or a simple contract like a lease on an apartment, that you're asking questions that somebody else without the legal background might not ask. And it's going to save you hassles that other people get caught up in on a regular basis because you know enough to read and you know enough to understand that there are day-to-day legal applications that you're always going to use. That's the next point. These day-to-day applications are everywhere. You know you have rights. Somebody else might just blindly accept something, but law school prepares you for that. You know that when somebody says this is the way it has to be, you know that contracts are amendable and terms can change. So the savviness that comes with having had a legal background will always be, I believe, part of your identity. And eventually, believe it or not, you will lose the need to tell everyone that you are, in fact, a lawyer. I remember when I first went to Kraft Foods for about the first 3 months, even though I was on the marketing side, when people said, "What do you do?" And this is embarrassing, but it's true. I'd say, well, I used to practice law, and now I'm in marketing for Kraft. And what happened eventually, the marketing part got to be more fun, and I realized that was probably more interesting to talk about, and I was more comfortable with the fact that my legal identity was there, but just submerged a little bit. So enough of, sorry, go ahead, Avery.
Cheryl, I was just thinking about that third point, that day-to-day legal applications are everywhere. Absolutely. I mean, I use them. I don't even think of them, legally in any sense of the word. But it's anywhere from, looking at a menu, right? Things aren't set in stone. I know that I can, basically choose what I want and, pick from the restaurant menu, what I want. To, recognizing when someone, when you're trying to reach some government agency, right, and they send you some automated system, I can figure out how to actually, speak to someone in person, and kind of use my legal research skills to identify the email, of a relevant person. So that's so true.
Elaine, what if we change this around? Elaine Weiss, are you with us?
I'm here.
Okay. Well, we're going to switch out your time and Howard's time until we figure out where we lost him. And instead of talking about menus, let's talk about putting your heart and soul into an issue or an industry, and kind of using that as a bad segue into your background and your role as executive director with the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. This is Elaine White. There you are.
All right, I'm here. So for me, the journey began almost the day I started law school, and I realized by the end of the first Socratic method experience that this was not really what I wanted to be in life, was a lawyer. But the background, the choice to get a law degree has never been anything I've regretted. I was an undergraduate journalism major. I was interested in First Amendment constitutional issues and being an investigative reporter. And most of that work ultimately winds back to understanding the law and how to navigate it. So for me, the journey into law school was never about practicing law, and this was completely confirmed when I clerked for a nice law firm for several years. Nicest people ever, corporate law firm, couldn't have been nicer, but I detested the billable hour mentality. And Avery talked about needing discipline to make her career choices, but for me, it was just that I totally detested tracking my life by billable hour increments. And I wasn't ever going to be able to succeed in life if that was the business model that I had to pursue. And I also realized as I traveled through law school that I loved advocacy. I had a passion for public interest and advocating on behalf of groups. So I quickly realized that I didn't want to practice law. I will tell everybody on this call, it is very difficult to pivot away from the traditional trajectory, because when you graduate from law school, everyone assumes you want to work for a law firm. All the recruiting, all the job direction is pointing in that direction. So it's a painful moment of a personal nature that you have to confront yourself and go, no, this isn't for me. And it takes a lot of networking and soul searching and internal listening to your own stomach and finding that right niche, which for me was public interest. I started out working on a court reform organization. I quickly morphed into working on women's health issues, which is a passion for forever and ever. Worked for Planned Parenthood and ultimately got a job at the American Bar Association heading up their Commission on Women's Issues, which had just formed at that time, and the glass ceiling was never brighter for women, even in our legal profession. And that was a perfect mix for somebody who wanted to use their law degree but not practice law, which was to work at the American Bar Association. And from there, I transitioned into other association management roles within the ABA and moved up so that I became more of an association management expert and less of an advocate for women. And I did that intentionally to reposition myself and pivot because I very much wanted to stay in the association management world. Association management turns out to be a terrific world for lawyers. You need to understand policy, personnel, people, politics, and a law degree, I think, has served me well in that capacity. I detoured for a few years to serve in the Clinton administration working on healthcare reform and healthcare policy as regional director of HHS, and then transitioned back into the association world. And over the last few years, I've landed safely in the healthcare association segment of the world where I can combine my love of association management with my passion for healthcare policy. I will tell you the journey has been nothing if not enjoyable because I didn't pursue traditional law, but I've never lost my identity as a lawyer. When people ask me what I do, I always start by going, well, my background is in law, but I'm in association management. And I would also say that as important as the jobs that you select to take along the way are the jobs you choose to reject. There have been a few points in my career where I've been offered bigger jobs that paid more, and it's very tempting. But I once had a mentor who said, you always need to listen to your heart when you're making career decisions, because you have to get up every day and do this job. And I find that there's a tricky balance between your heart and your pocketbook. You still need to pay the mortgage. You still want to send your kids to college. But I have found that on several occasions I've turned down jobs, and those have been as critical as the jobs I've selected along the way. I think the trade-off for people choosing non-traditional careers, just to wrap up, is that you don't have to lose your identity, but you have to lose a little bit of your arrogance that I think comes with legal education sometimes. You can't presume that because you're a lawyer that every job you're qualified for. I get people all the time who want to work in association management and assume because they've been a lawyer who once did a case on healthcare that they're qualified. And that's not true. You have to be respectful of the other fields you're pursuing and the expertise that needs to go with that. I think you get to also have to trade off a little bit of what's sometimes money. The greatest jobs in the world may not pay as much as the big law firm jobs do, and you have to be very honest with yourself about where your comfort level is. And I've always been fortunate to be able to mesh the money with the values that get me up on a Monday morning. And finally, I think you have to be able to define yourself, as Cheryl pointed out, as something other than a lawyer. You're always a lawyer. It's been absolutely essential to my success in every career move I've made. On any given week, I'm reviewing contracts, I'm dealing with employment issues, I'm dealing with regulation or legislation where the legal background is important. But you just can't wake up every day thinking you're a lawyer. You have to be ready to embrace a new professional identity and be comfortable with it. And for me, that's been a hugely satisfying journey through life.
Elaine, wait, can we go back a slide, guys? Because I want to point to something that Elaine was saying. This idea that you don't exactly know where you're going to go, but this JD on your resume can be something that helps launch you and helps offer, just almost as a shorthand for credibility, for smarts. I mean, if you would have imagined your career at the beginning, do you think you would have ever seen the trajectory that things actually took for you?
No, I think the joy in my life has never been knowing what the next move is going to be, but it's always made sense in hindsight. And I will also say the credibility that the non-world of lawyers has for lawyers, you're elevated higher in their estimation by not being a lawyer in a lawyer's world, because everyone has a lot of respect for lawyers. I will also say doctors don't always love them. So you do have to know when not to say you're a lawyer, to Cheryl's earlier point. And if and
sometimes
you
got to keep things to yourself.
Well, and you have to be able to withstand a lot of bad lawyer jokes in meetings, but everybody respects the credential, and it serves you well in getting your foot in the door and proving yourself once you're on the job.
Those are such good thoughts, and I think you and I know each other outside of this call, so we've had this discussion often about different ways that people can move and can pivot. But you raise a really, really good point that when you're a lawyer and you perhaps think highly of yourself, that doesn't mean you can do somebody else's job. And I've also seen this in Avery. I'm sure you've had experience to deal with this also, where instead of doing the homework about what someone else does and understanding what your transferable skills are, sometimes lawyers make the assumption that they can just go in and do those jobs. And they may have the smarts, but they don't have the tools. And nothing turns off a prospective employer more than you coming in and say, hey, I can do your job without any experience or any background. So when we get to the steps you take in career transition, everybody has to understand that. I would love for Howard to be able to tell his story also, but we are still having technical problems. Howard, any chance you are on this call?
Can you hear me?
Yay,
Hello?
You're back. Yes, can you hear us?
I can hear. I heard everything, so I was surprised you guys couldn't hear me, but hello.
Hello and welcome, Howard Davis. Tell us about life in your world, in your alternative / traditional career balanced world.
Well, it started traditional. I started at a large firm in Chicago, and then switched to a medium-sized firm in Chicago, and I pursued a traditional legal career, which is what I thought I would do my whole career. But I realized in myself I had entrepreneurial instincts, and it came about the opportunity to get involved in building restaurants in Chicago. And so I joined with my partner in 1991, and we developed some of the most popular restaurants in Chicago at the time on West Randolph Street, and built a big restaurant company. So phase one of my career was very traditional, big firm to medium-sized firm, doing traditional corporate litigation practice. Second phase was going of counsel to the law firm and working more in the business to build up the restaurant business. It became large enough to the point where I didn't need the income from the law practice anymore. So I kind of was, straddling both worlds, the entrepreneurial world and the law firm world. And then the crash occurred in '08, which forced us to close many of our restaurants. And I had to go back to practicing law full time because the restaurant business had contracted to the point where it wasn't able to financially support me. And I never thought previously about opening my own practice. And I tried, or at least tossed around the possibility of going back to my former law firm, but I wound up opening my own practice and going back to building more restaurants. We just opened one recently in Andersonville neighborhood of Chicago called Bar Roma, food from Rome, Italy, which is doing very well. But I gave that quote to people because I never envisioned that my career would wind up with me having my own solo practice, which is corporate litigation, corporate transactions, and then doing the business restaurants on the side. But that's where I wound up, and I'm actually quite happy that that's where I wound up, because I get to have the best of both worlds. And there's a certain independence you have as a solo practitioner that you don't have working for a firm. And I didn't realize when I started out my career that I did not like all the administrative bureaucratic responsibilities of working in a bigger firm. So, when young people ask me, what should I do? My son just went to college, and he says, I don't know what I want to do. And I said, my friends are turning 60, and they still don't know what to do with their lives. But, but choose something, pick something. And if it's the wrong thing, at least it'll bring you closer to what you should be doing.
I think when you've made a career change or transition, you do have this sense of liberation that, I can stand on my own 2 feet. I can bring to bear the smarts that I have and the other transferable skills. But why restaurants? I mean, Elaine had said she'd always been interested in healthcare and policy and advocacy. Avery said the same thing about public policy and advocacy. Were restaurants something that you had a particular passion for?
No, other than, liking going out to eat. I had a passion for entrepreneurism and business. And it just so happened that a friend, my partner in the restaurant businesses, had the experience in the restaurants. And so I went in that direction. It could have been any business. In fact, it's branched off now to the point where I am involved in importing spices from Asia and other businesses that are kind of tangentially connected to the restaurant industry. But no, it was more about being an entrepreneur and being involved in business and not just being a straight traditional lawyer.
So, Howard, I get asked this question. I'm going to ask you the question that I get asked a lot. How do you do it all?
Well, the things you were saying about the analytical skills that you're taught as a lawyer and knowing how to solve problems You just bring them to whatever endeavor you're involved in, and you wind up being able to address and handle things in areas that you're not traditionally, educated or experienced in, but the lawyer skills help you get it done. You just know how to get things done.
That's another one of those pieces that once a lawyer, always a lawyer. That's just sort of a part of you. I don't know who's got the slides and who doesn't, so I'm going off of what I know comes next in this program, which is, when do we start to pivot? When does an individual start to think about what's next for me? And I think my answer to that was, you should have started yesterday. Every day you should be assessing, am I moving, maybe not every day, but every week on a regular basis? Who am I? What am I looking for out of a career, and am I getting it? It changes with time. You may want one thing at the beginning stages of your career, but then as you begin to know yourself better and see what's missing, you may decide that you want to pivot and change what you're looking for. The who, what, when, where, why of you is a very key, critical first step to deciding when is it time to pivot, because you got to know what you're looking for. You can't just run away from something without some idea of what you want to have in your future. And one of the ways you do that, besides assessing who you are, is assessing the markets that are out there. So remember that chart we saw earlier with all the 60 different areas? You can start with something like that and say, which of those areas and industries interest me? Maybe you have to go to a broader source. Maybe you have to just look at your hobbies and say, I love restaurants, or I care a lot about healthcare, or public policy and making a difference in people's lives is what's really important to me. Then you need to find out, once you know what triggers your interests, what areas and industries are out there that are looking for somebody who does feel a passion for it. Once you have some idea of what those markets might be, then you got to start digging, and lawyers are good at this. Some of the research you can do is secondary. You can go online and look at jobs in the healthcare field or jobs in the association world just to get some ideas, or jobs in the bartending world. But what you really have to do is move that into a networking phase where you're talking to people one-on-one saying, hey, what do you really do? And how did you get there? Howard talks about having internships for people who are interested in the restaurant side of the legal side of the restaurant industry. The chance to learn firsthand by talking to somebody or doing an internship or joining a trade association and helping with the issues that come up in that world, were always for you to learn about these other areas and industries. And the last thing that you want to do about when do you start to pivot is to rewrite your resume and apply to jobs. I think a lot of people do that in the wrong order. They start with the applications, but they really don't know what to say because they haven't done the hard work in the earlier stages, assessing who they are, assessing what the markets are that will value them, and really learning what those markets are all about. Avery, that's, I think, how you start to pivot. But what do you think? What do you recommend when people say, when do I make the move?
Yeah, so let's go to the next slide. And it's really based on really two main elements. And that is about how happy you are, how satisfied you are, and the money. So let's talk about career satisfaction. You constantly have to be checking in with yourself. Whether you want to make that pivot or not, you should always be checking in with yourself as you move through different stages in your career. Ask yourself, are you happy or satisfied? And if you're not, why? And some of this can be painful. It can be really hard to really identify, maybe an issue or a point that isn't making you as happy or satisfied as you'd like. Ask yourself, is there something that you're not doing? Or is there something that you don't like doing more? I know that Elaine mentioned she hates the billable hours. So maybe that was one of many things that kind of helped, like as she said, make that move. Or has your role recently changed? And then also think about this too. Maybe it's not that you have to do something entirely different, but return to something that you enjoyed in the past. So the question is also, have you had roles in the past that you've enjoyed or that you've enjoyed more, or that there are elements of past roles that you have really found satisfying. And then the money issue. So think about the economics and the finances. How much do I need to make to survive? And how much do I want to make to live the lifestyle that I want? So there's a key distinction here. It's what do I have to make and what do I want to make? Now, some people don't see that distinction, but I do think it's important. How much is just enough to get by? But then also, I mean, what is it that's going to, make your life enjoyable? Or happy. Some people don't need a lot of money to make them happy, but others do. Do you have loans that you still need to pay off? Do you have a family or dependents in which you need to factor in those money issues? And so are you able to take a pay cut? As Elaine said, yes, some of these jobs don't pay as much. Some pay even more. It just depends on what you want to pursue. And now, if you're able to take a pay cut, are you saving now to be able to do this?
One of the things
yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to add, a client once said that she felt that even though she took a pay cut to go into a nonprofit job from a law firm, she felt that it was a, quote, direct deposit into the job satisfaction bank. And I loved the way that sounded. She said all the things that she was buying for herself because she was so unhappy, and the big vacations and the fancy clothes were really no match for just getting more satisfaction out of what her career was all about.
Yeah, so they go hand in hand.
Right. Different ways to look at what is satisfying, and how being paid or being rewarded for what you do isn't always in the form of dollars and cents. It can be how you feel at the end of the day. It can be the legacy you feel that you're leaving for your family or for future generations or just for the world around you.
And that's a very common reason for why people pivot, right? So let's go to some key takeaways. I'll address the first two. Cheryl, you can address the second two.
Sure.
So once a lawyer, always a lawyer. It transcends you. Lawyers, we talked about this, with our panelists. Lawyers solve problems. We have skills that are transferable. Next, identify your sweet spot. So think about what lies at the intersection of your experience, your expertise, and what you want to do. You almost can kind of think of like a Venn diagram and think about, what's in that center. That can be hard to do, but it also can be a really nice critical assessment for really identifying that pivot and that niche and where you want to take your next step.
And to take this a little bit further, another key takeaway is to be practical. Lawyers tend to be risk averse. We are taught to think things through. And the idea that you're just going to, drop everything and go be the next beachcomber is probably not the thing you're really looking for. So weigh, what are you willing to trade off in terms of financial security and job security for something new? What are the economic concerns? The people who really are serious about career change often think about it long before they actually make the change. So there's time to sell an expensive condo or get rid of that fancy sports car that you bought yourself while you were practicing law because you needed that to feel good on the side, and readjust your finances. Maybe put some money away, or maybe use, if you're lucky enough to have a big salary, use some of that to pay down student debt so that you can be practical and free yourself up from some of the financial constraints that can come, don't have to, but can sometimes come with career change. Also on the practical side, if you have, let's say, a young family, you may not be able to take a job that has you traveling all the time. Even if that's your dream, you may have to start smaller and say, what is the progression that this new career will take me on so I can start now to be here where I need to be. It's because you don't abandon your family or the other things that are important to you, right? You're not trying to trade off one unhappy situation for another. You want your career to be happy so that the rest of your life will also be balanced and happy. And at the end of the day, and I think, Elaine suggested it and Howard suggested it and Avery, you actually did it. At some point, you got to take that first leap of faith and you got to do it. And you got to say, I may not get to exactly where I'm going, but I owe it to myself to try. And again, that liberation that I talked about that comes with realizing you've got skills, you've got interests, you've got passions, and you can put them to work in lots of different places is a really, really good feel. But I have a couple of questions just for the other panelists, and I'm wondering if the four of us can bounce this around while we still have some time. If any of you weren't doing what you're doing now, or maybe a different way to say this, what would be your next pivot? Do you think there's, I sort of joked around that my next pivot would be to go with this crazy mixology business. Does anybody else have something else in their back pocket that they're thinking of expanding into or moving towards down the road, or something else that maybe it's just a wild idea, but maybe somehow it could be part of their future?
This is Howard.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, Elaine, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, go ahead, Howard. This is Avery, but go ahead first.
Okay. No, I was saying, as you get older, you think more about giving back to the world. And I started studying Kabbalah 12 years ago. I have started teaching it, and that's kind of what I would like to add to my career repertoire.
That feeling of being able to offer something different at a different stage, that, again, a lot of the things we were all doing weren't what we planned to, but I love it that this stage in life that appeals to you, and it's something that you grew into that wouldn't have perhaps jumped out 20 years ago. Avery, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so my interest peaked up when Elaine said that she went to Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism because, yes, I've been writing for a long time, but I've also been really interested in broadcast journalism. I was always the kid younger, always wanting to do the presentation, always, speaking, before people. And I always found broadcast journalism really interesting. And that's perhaps why I knew to put Savannah Guthrie up there. And there are a few, and there are a few others that also have, many, law degrees on the air. And so that has always been something in the back of my mind to look into and to pursue. But I will tell you that I'm sure you know that it is really difficult. The news goes very quickly. And the industry is fierce in terms of competition.
You know who else is a lawyer? Christine McFadden. Have you ever heard? She's on the NBC Nightly News. I think she's a lawyer by background. And I remember she got her start during the Iraq War. And I guess they needed correspondence, and I remember hearing then how interesting that she was a journalist, as an attorney by background. But Avery, now I want to know: do you also want to be an opera singer? Is that part of why you picked
that? No, no. Probably that stems from family blasting opera music throughout the house.
Elaine, any thoughts that you might want to share with us about where you might go down the road?
If I were being practical, I would say for me the next move would be to help recruit future association management people, because it's a very specialized industry that most people don't know about. And so finding the new talent from lawyer worlds and everything else and recruiting a whole fresh leadership into the association management would be practical. If I had to not worry about money, I'd love to be a columnist, an essayist. I love to write, my journalism degree, and kind of do columns and essays about life. And with the online world, there's somewhere for everybody to write something. If I could do anything, I'd be a caterer because I love to cook and entertain. But I think the other thing.
Can I introduce you to my friend Howard Davis? He's interested in restaurants. See, there are networking opportunities everywhere.
If you watch cable news these days, and God help us, we shouldn't all do it as a junkie like I am, but every other person on cable news that they talk to these days is lawyer, because there's so many debates going on that are going through the court system. And the challenges in the political world are all legally based. So they're all bringing on prosecutors and lawyers to help everybody ascertain what the meaning of all the public policy stuff going on today. So it's a very powerful intersection if you are a broadcast news person and a lawyer these days.
Indeed.
I also, again, because I have the pleasure of knowing all of you guys a little bit on a personal basis too. Elaine, don't you serve on the Association of Associations? So
Yeah.
you kind of have a. Yes, I didn't make. For anyone listening, I didn't make up that title.
One of the reasons I think association world is a good one for lawyers to travel is because there's an association for everything. Every body part has at least 4 associations representing it in Washington, D.C. And so you need to find out what your interest is, and then there's an association that matches it. And so there's a group called the American Society of Association Executives that help you get certified to be an association executive. There is a certification, and you can join that and find every possible association and job within that world, from government affairs to governance to general counsel to executive suite, that might make sense for you in the association that matches what your private passions are. So I find being involved in the Association of Associations to be one of my favorite goofy part-time jobs.
And it's not just for getting jobs in an association. What some will come to me as a client and say, I'm interested in, fill out the publishing. There's a publishing association. There's probably textbook associations and magazine associations. There are restaurant associations and spirit associations. So as a source of information, when you're doing your resourcing and your networking, try to plug into the association that supports the issues and the people that you want to be a part of. Howard, I don't know if you had time. Did you manage to get to the National Restaurant Association at McCormick Place just a month or so ago?
Not this year, but I've been to many of them. Yeah, it's a great place for networking, and it sounds like, Cheryl, your mixology and Elaine's catering might help me expand my restaurant business.
That's great.
You never know where the next lead comes from.
Indeed, and I want to be respectful of our audience's time. We're at the top of the hour. So thank you to our panelists, Elaine and Howard, for sharing your stories. Always a pleasure, Cheryl, to speak with and learn from you. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact us. In the meantime, we wish you a great rest of your afternoon. And I think the ABA has another webinar coming up.
Thank you to our presenters, Avery and Cheryl, and to our speakers, Howard Davis and Elaine Weiss, for this insightful program. And thank you all for attending today. As a reminder, attendees will receive a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint in a follow-up email within 7 business days. Before you leave, please complete our short survey. Register for this upcoming Career Development Series program. For program information, updates, and more, connect with us on social media. Lastly, be sure to check out the leadership page on the website to learn more about who helps to make programs like this possible.